Hi, Tab. How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Alan. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. You are the creator of the Kingfish. I assume it's a series that you're trying to pull together here.
Yeah, it's going to be like Mission Impossible or John Wick, which is it's not just one, but if we get the inspiration, we'll do more.
Okay. Well, yeah. Tell us about Kingfish and more recently Kingfish 2. The Kingfish. Let's.
That's right. Everyone refers to it as Kingfish. Yeah, it started as a small project. My son, who plays X in the film, and Britt Stargill, who plays Flip, they both attended the same high school in Philly, as well as a third member of their clique who were all in the theater club at the school. And so one of the things that I said, and I think they were like the three Black students who always landed roles in all the productions. So they were pretty popular, pretty good. So one of the things I was having a discussion with Xavier about is, like the music business, if someone's going to take an interest, they're going to want to see what you got. If you're in music, they're going to want to hear a song that you've recorded. If they're interested in potentially having you play a role in something, they may want to see you perform. And they're not going to go to your school. So you all need something like a little promo reel that you can use to promote yourselves if necessary. So we had a discussion and I said, tell you what, I'll get together with a friend of mine named Josh Black, who's an incredible creator, etc., who puts together these 3-4 minute video clips to promote his brand. And they're cool, they're edgy, they're hip, they're sharp. You look at them and say, man, I want something like that. So I said, I'll get with Josh. We'll put together a little 3-minute promo sample that you and your buddies can use to promote yourselves, and then you'll have something. I said, I'll call it the Kingfish. Why? Because I thought it was easy to remember, kind of catchy, and it lends itself to possibilities for what the Kingfish could be or who the Kingfish could be. So I said, okay, I'll craft something. And I put together a little thing about they go to North Philly, get into some trouble, but it's not the kind of trouble you think it's going to be. So it's all about deception. And that 3-minute thing turned into a 10-minute thing. And that turned to 15 as we started adding more people and saying, oh, in order for this to work, we're going to have to expand this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it turned from a little 3-minute thing that Josh and I were going to put together to something a little broader. So I said, well, it's kind of beyond what Josh and I know how to film. So let me find some guys who can do it. So we found a film crew, hired them, and they came and filmed the production. And that turned out to be the first Kingfish pilot, which was about 20 minutes in duration. And the reception was really good. I mean, first film, technically flawed, etc. But people really appreciated not just the story and not just the fact that it represented positively young Black teens in urban Philadelphia, but that you couldn't predict where the story was going. So you think it's one thing, but it turned out to be another. So I intentionally, when I was writing it, tried to use people's inherent biases and prejudices against them. So, for example, in one scene, you see them confronted by a gang of guys, and you think, oh, it's going to be a fight. And it turns out to be something totally opposite. So people appreciated that. They thought it was clever, but more importantly, they thought it was fun, and they thought it was a positive representation of young folks. So it served its purpose. But then it got super popular, entered into a couple of film festivals locally, won them both. And so we said, I know we can do a better job. I wasn't totally satisfied with the first one, so we're going to do a second one. And that was Kingfish 2. More cast members, a full feature this time, broader storyline, and but the same concept, a positive representation of young Black folks in urban Philadelphia, free from all the typical stereotypes that are not flattering, that are oftentimes portrayed in indie Black films, but also something that, look, you go to the movies to be entertained. Just go and have some fun with it. We don't take ourselves too seriously, as you can tell by a lot of the things in the film, but that's intentional. We want folks to sit back and say, oh, I get it. We're just supposed to soak this in and enjoy it. Let's just have some fun with it. So that's it.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like you're doing what I feel like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon kind of strayed from is just that idea of kids having fun, kids using their brains, the things they love, their intellect to solve problems, friendship, and then in Kingfish 2 you have kind of romance kind of going on as well. And it's like, sometimes we don't need to complicate these kind of stories.
Right.
And I think that's what Hollywood's been doing too much of, is just complicating. And you know, sometimes you just want to be people and do what normal people do and have fun at it.
Yeah, I agree. I watch films whenever I get an opportunity to, and there are a couple that I watched recently, and I'm watching and I'm saying, okay, well, one of them I'm being entertained by it. It's kind of fun, and plus the Obamas were behind it, so I thought that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the film, I said, okay, I enjoyed the experience, but I'm curious what the ending was all about. So I went onto YouTube, like most people do, and I looked at maybe 5 or 6 different film reviewers who, with spoilers, said, we're going to explain the ending. And I also, by the way, looked at Film Threat because when you and Chris get together, it's always fun. So I watch you guys every week.
Oh, thanks.
And so out of the 6 film reviewers, 2 had the identical representation of what the film was all about and the ending, but the other 4 had totally different ideas. And my thought was, why should people have to work to figure out what is this about? Or is it intended that we look at it and make up our own story? It should be, in my opinion, entertaining first and foremost, something that can mean something to somebody, and something that we don't have to work hard to understand. I mean, film is supposed to be passive entertainment. You sit back and you enjoy it, as opposed to, unless it's like you and Chris, who are film critics, and you say, okay, we're going to dissect this from a technical standpoint. Oh my goodness, I didn't like that.
Yeah.
But for lay people like me, I just want to have fun.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, we tend to dissect things just because, it's like you're trying to tell a story, you're trying to get your point across, and sometimes you do something in a film that just kind of throws people out of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that it was at that point, we as an audience disengage. Because I mean, I will say, that you don't want people to have to think a lot, but you do want them to think a little bit.
Yes.
And I think what your series does, it just reminds us, how average people solve situations, how average people solve interpersonal situations, and ultimately that's the thing that binds us together, is just the fact that we walk out the door and we have to interact with one another, and things go right sometimes and things go wrong sometimes. And how do you fix that? We don't have to dig deep for ulterior motives, for generational sins and things like that. And so, and I when I was watching the Kingfish 2, I was thinking, this reminds me a lot of Saved by the Bell. And especially the you use animation quite a bit. And then I remember in the first episode, it was just kind of like Flip using everything I'd learned in science to solve a problem. And and it, like I said, it just, these are the things that grounds us and binds us together, because when it comes down to it, we're all pretty much the same, going through the same situations. So let me ask you this. I mean, what were some of the challenges early on? Because you have an idea, you have a cast, and now you want to film something, and I'm going to assume you had very little money to do this.
Right.
What were some of the challenges you faced in terms of getting the project put together?
Scarcity. When you have scarce resources, you have to focus on being tactical. In other words, look, we don't have time for all the extra amenities. We have to get certain things done, because for this film, one of the big challenges was, because I'm paying for it out of my pocket, but I have 2 tuitions that we're also paying for. So I didn't have a lot of money for this one. I tell people when they ask me how much, I said, well, you could buy an old Ford used Taurus with what I had to spend on this. So that was the first thing. We hired the film crew. We had to feed everybody. We gave everybody a little bit of cash, just to make it worthwhile and more engaging, like a real movie experience, etc. So we had a scarcity of financial resources, or at least there was a limit as to what I was willing to put forth for this. So we hired a film crew. We had them for 3 days. So that's another scarcity time. And on one of the days, the second day, halfway through the day, it rained. So that was one of the big challenges. We tried to take it indoors and film the outdoor scene indoors, but as you're aware, one of the things that takes the longest in these films is setting up the lighting. So that didn't work. Then it cleared up. but then we got out there for a little bit and it became too dark. So that was one of the challenges is, okay, we shot all this footage and now we have to make it work. You know, one of the things I did read the review. Thank you, by the way. I always enjoy when you review films. I like reading your reviews. And one of the things you mentioned is, hey, the dialogue, make it sequential, make it more natural. And I laughed when I read that because I had a feeling that you were talking about this one scene in the warehouse with the kingfish where he says, so you're Flip, pause, cut the flip, come back to the kingfish, the one who defeated Smart Homie, etc. I know. The problem is, and this is one of the challenges with that scarcity I talked about, you got to make do with what you have. So that one scene, there was not a contiguous take of the kingfish where it was all put together. It was all filmed the same. He was in the same position because he would say a line like, so you're Flip. What's that line again, fellas? Oh, the one who defeated Smart Homie. Okay. Then he'd be over here when he said it again in the good take. So we had to go back and find takes where he looked the same.
Yeah,
and that's the reason for the.
So now you're doing puzzle. You're putting a puzzle together.
Yeah. So we got through it, and but the biggest challenge was we had a bigger film cast this time, 23 people as opposed to the handful in the first one. We had multiple locations. We had the outdoor Philadelphia scene. We had the coffee shop scene. We had the warehouse scene. And we shot a lot of it at my house because it's cheap. I didn't have to pay anybody to do it. And we could take as long as we want. So the different locations was also a challenge, you know, when you don't have a whole lot of cash. But in the end, you know, we achieved what it is that we started out to do, which is to make something that, one, people would enjoy. Two, that people would be willing to say, I got to tell somebody about this because look, Black folks aren't embarrassing themselves. And three, because it serves a broader purpose. You know, we talked earlier about how some of these films are too complicated. People just want to have fun and be passively entertained. But the Kingfish, you know, on the surface, that's what it is. But there's a lot of nuance in the Kingfish. A lot of subliminal messaging because we show it to folks, we show it to students. And this year I'm going to start showing it to universities and doing lectures with it. One of the things I do for work, by the way, is speeches and lectures and all that stuff. Because from a social and urban society standpoint, there's a lot of context that you can have discussions with young people about. And from a social studies and urban studies standpoint, you can do the same thing. You know, some people will just watch a scene and say, oh, that was kind of funny. For example, in the Kingfish's lair, when he says, I have a proposition for you, and Flip says, the smart one, I'm flattered that you think I can help you with this, but you're involved in criminal activity. I want no parts of that. And Kingfish says, oh, I'm a legitimate businessman, which is a joke, of course. But then he had a proposition, and the proposition was something that Flip thought was amazing. Well, on the surface, just a scene. But from an urban study standpoint, one of the discussion points is going to be, how would you interpret that scene and relate it to what oftentimes happens in urban communities on the negative side, where people who are otherwise smart get pulled into illegal things that they know better, but something so enticing. Well, that's what happened here. You know, a copy of that book, Flip, who's a academic, my goodness, that's like gold, so much so that he faints. But then you have two friends who are saying, yo, he must have lost his mind. And they get out and say, Flip, what are you doing? And then Flip put it into the context of terms that they can understand and appreciate to get them on board. This is why I did it. And they say, oh, my goodness, we got to now help you. So that's an example of one of the subtleties. And there are about 15 that are built into the Kingfish. On the surface, people wouldn't even notice. But if I'm going to be talking about it with university students, these are the kinds of concepts that we're going to dig into to show some of the parallels between the way that things in the traditional sense of the unflattering characterizations of African-American teens in urban city independent films. And some of the things, although it's different, some of the same context still lie beneath it, which means that even growing up in an urban, I grew up in North Philly myself, and even for folks who are on an academic path to try to, you know, advance themselves, you know, you can always fall into the traps that folks who are not on those academic paths fall into. Your situation is just a little bit different. So there's a whole bunch of that in the Kingfish for people who want to dig for deeper meaning.
That's amazing. All right. So where can we see the Kingfish now?
It's currently streaming on Amazon Prime. It's currently streaming on Reveal. We just signed up Tubi, Fawsome, FilmRise, something called Guanjing. It's supposed to be a clean version of YouTube, whatever. And Film and Flix, Flix Film or Film Flix or something like that. It's a new one. We signed up as well. So those are coming. But today, if you want to go watch it, and please do, you can go to Amazon Prime or Reveal. And one final point that I do want to mention.
Okay.
In our target demographic, and surprisingly, you would think our demographic is teen folks, because you mentioned yourself, you said, hey, it reminds me of Saved by the Bell. Although we never get that, what we often get is people say, oh, it reminds me of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Or people who are older will say, it reminds me of What's Happening, the old show back in the 70s, which I agree with. And a smaller percentage of people say, it reminds me of like a teen version of Blackish. But here's what's interesting. We targeted African-American parents as our primary demographic. We figured the other folks would come along. And the reason is because when they see it, we knew the response they gave in the first one. They would say, oh my goodness, look at the positive representation of our young people. And they start telling their friends, specifically African-American mothers. Shout out to you all who've been promoting it. They've been sharing with their churches, their groups, their Facebook groups, their parent-teacher groups in schools. Schools have been sharing with their administrations to say, hey, add this to our YouTube site, our Facebook site, to let people know it's available. They have been promoting it hard. We also, the NAACP, they want to partner with us on doing some screenings and talks about the film as well. And the reason is because they give us consistent feedback. Of all the people that we have heard from collectively, and there have been hundreds, there are two things they all say when it comes to the parents. One, it was so refreshing to see our Black folks represented this way. And two, it was a lot of fun. And we did a third one as well, and only about 50% of the people said this, and that is, it was one of the films where I'm watching it with my kids and I didn't have to cringe at certain scenes because I knew everything was good. So that's what we set out to do, and it seems like so far the feedback is that we're doing a good job with it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you chatting with me, and good luck to the Kingfish.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. So long.